This episode is for those of you who, like me, maybe aren't where we want to be just yet. It's a collection of my writings, which I'm going to share with you, some of my thoughts and my feelings on a topic that is consistently at the forefront of my mind. I've always been a dreamer, and I want to kick it off with something I've recently written. I've always been a dreamer. Even as a kid, I felt like I was put on this earth with a bigger purpose. There's something so beautifully freeing about childhood. No goal ever felt too big. There was nothing to lose in the pursuit of your dreams, and every step toward them was significant and something to be celebrated. Then all of a sudden, you grow up and the world tells you that the clock is ticking. If you haven't realized your dreams by your mid-20s, if they aren't paying your bills, buying you a house, and jet-setting you around the world, then they aren't worth your time anymore. The world tells you to squander them for the safe job, to settle for everyone else's ordinary. But no one ever tells you that you can both look after yourself and follow your passions. No one ever reminds us that the world doesn't need to know who you are or what you do for you to be considered a success. It's simply the art of doing and the act of pursuit that makes your dreams a reality in the first place. I once heard Harry Styles say that if you're happy doing what you're doing, then nobody can tell you that you're not successful. And I love that. You know, that I've learned that we may not be appreciated in our time, but we have to learn to appreciate the time we have living a life that is true to us. That's the secret. This topic sits on the front of my mind all the time. I said this before because as a kid, I always had such big dreams. And as I said, in childhood, that's celebrated, you know. Nobody discourages a child, or no sane person, or no person who cares about the child that is announcing their dreams, stops them and says that that's not possible. The only rebuttal to I have a dream to be this is, well, provided you work hard and you stay true to it, you can achieve it. We often look at the movie and we see the kid who announces their dream and the adult who shoots it down, and we say, what an arsehole. And all of a sudden, so many of us become that arsehole. We start to squander our own dreams. You know, the idea of, I would love to be doing this, whether it's I'd love to be a musician, or I'd love to be a writer, or I'd like to start that podcast, I'd like to do some acting. You know, we feel these things deep inside of us. They come to the top of our mind. We're scared to announce them because there's that part of our own self-doubt, that part of the conditioning of the world that we live in that's told you, nah, that's not for you, bud. You know, just recently I shared a clip of an episode of this pod on social media, and the clip was with a guy who was just had incredible success in the podcast space in this last year. And people are just saying things like, put the microphone down. You know, we don't need to hear from you. We don't need another shit podcast. And you just think, man, who squandered that person's dreams to make them such an arsehole? Why are they being the arsehole that their childhood self would have hated? And they don't know, but this person's already successful. They've already proven themselves. They've already shown that they're valuable to so many people. And there's such a lesson in that you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. That your dream, that my dream isn't going to resonate with everyone. And I think that's such an important thing to remember. Because you feel a piece of your heart break when someone tells you that the thing that you love or the thing that you want to achieve so bad isn't for you. But the truth is, that's nobody else's dream to squander. It's yours. I don't think you should be asking for permission in matters of the heart or matters of our dreams, because they're personal. And you get a sense of the right people or the people that you want to have around by the way that they respond to those things. And I just want to talk about for a moment the idea of a dream, because I've had so many of them throughout the course of my life. I often say my first dream was to be Batman. It was the first kind of thing I could envision myself doing and being as a kid. In fact, I might overlay on a clip if I put this out. There's some vision of me that I recently seen on an old home video maker camcorder of me running around as a 4-year-old boy with black undies on, a Batman mask and a cape. And just, you could tell I embodied it. I believed it. My next dream was to be a professional rugby league player, and I grew up idolising the likes of Brad Fittler and wanting to play the game that those guys did. And then now I'm 28 years old, a big kid with big dreams still, and those dreams are different. They're to uplift and inspire hope in others through story, and I use the podcast as a vehicle to do that. I use keynote speaking as a vehicle to do that. Who knows what else is in front of me and what opportunities will be presented to me, because I'm trying not to be too rigid with my dreams. I'm trying not to see them in isolation or see them being achieved through only one vehicle or through one opportunity or through the way that I always envision them happening. But rather I'm trying to not be so rigid and see what opportunities life presents me to show up and pursue those dreams. And, I just think at what point did we stop giving people grace to do the things that their heart was telling them to do? Just because your dream may be to be a musician doesn't mean that you have to step on a stage with a crowd the size of, one of these top artists like a Taylor Swift or a Post Malone. Your dream of being a musician could be that you sit in your living room at night and write songs and strum a guitar, or you play a piano. That is the act of doing. As I said in that little piece of writing I just wrote at the start and just read out, it's the act of doing. It's the art of doing that actually makes your dreams a reality in the first place. But we have, for whatever reason, we continue to attach these metrics, rankings, standards to the idea of our dream being fulfilled. I remember when I started this podcast, there was a blissful ignorance, a sense of naivety that I actually think is really important and highly valuable when we start things, because if often we knew all of the challenges that would come down the line or all the things and obstacles that would be in our way, we might not have had the courage to start the thing in the first place. But there was this naivety that rankings, numbers, volume of listeners was actually going to be important to the pursuit of this. And certainly it's an important element of making a business out of it, but it's not the reason I started in the first place. I didn't start because I thought it was important to be a chart-topping podcaster. I didn't start because I thought it's only valuable if people deem it to be the best. I started because these were heart-centric conversations that uplifted and inspired me with incredible guests. They were topics like I'm riffing on today that made sense to talk about because I wasn't hearing anyone else talk about them. I almost started the podcast because it's what I needed at that point in my life. And I think the podcast has grown with me and evolved with me. And I'm really proud of that. And I often cast my mind forward. And I recently had a great guest on, Tim Noonan, documentary filmmaker, who has a sensational story. You can go back and listen to that. And I said something along the lines of, I got caught in this old way of thinking that, I haven't necessarily made a success out of this yet. And he goes, what do you mean? This is a success. You're having these incredible conversations with wonderful guests. And he was so right. I love the podcast for everything that it's been. 246 episodes. The average podcast, 90% of podcasts don't make it past 13 episodes. And of the 10% that do, 90% don't make it past episode 50 or something like that. So this is 250 episodes in, and I've met all of these incredible people. Another great thing that Tim said on the podcast is that life doesn't exactly give us what we want, but it often gives us what we need. And I think about this challenge that we have as human beings. We have such a singular focus, and we tend to isolate our focus on the more pessimistic things that we're experiencing. We're often prisoners of our perception, or we often have a freedom that we get through our perception if we like to look at life through an optimistic lens. And in those times where we're pessimistically focusing on one singular thing that isn't going so well, we can lose track of how much our life has changed around it. And the example that is true to me that I'll share with you right now is I can look and go, man, the numbers of this podcast and the metrics attached to it are certainly not where I thought they would be 4.5 years in. I'm actually so far behind where I had pictured myself being from a numbers and viewership level. And you can say a million different things about that. You can say that I haven't marketed it well enough. Maybe it's not as good as I think it is, but it certainly resonates with me. I certainly enjoy the pursuit of it. And maybe it's not for everyone. I don't think we're ever everyone's cup of tea. But I certainly know it's important to a few people who connect with me and listen to the show. But if I take a step back and look at the big picture, the way that my life has changed in 4.5 years. When I started the show, I was just so uninspired. I didn't have a purpose to get out of bed in the morning. I wasn't very happy. I had a beautiful family and great friends around me, but my health was in spiral. There were all these difficulties in my life that I was experiencing that were adding to the fabric of who I was as a human being. And when I was looking at who I was as a human being in the mirror, I wasn't exactly proud of what I was seeing. And the beginning of this, the creation of this podcast, inspired so much forward progress in me and so much reflection in where I was at and accountability and ownership that so much of my life has changed in those 4.5 years. My health is in an incredible place right now. It's the best it's ever been, which is so important for someone with cystic fibrosis. I'm engaged to a woman I love and adore so dearly, and we have the most incredible relationship, and I've found a best friend in her, and I'm so excited for life together. And I wake up every day and I look at her and I feel so blessed for where I'm at. And I've met all of these incredible people that I've learnt from and been able to hear their stories and learn lessons along with them and to connect and to make sense of some of the things I'm experiencing and feeling. And I've created some of my best friendships out of this podcast. And so when I look at the bigger picture, I say, hey, what a success this is. You know, that Harry Styles quote again. If you're happy doing what you're doing, nobody can tell you that you're not a success. Like, to me, that is success. I think the challenge is redefining success from this thing that is metrically focused to this thing that is heart-centric. How do you feel about the thing that you're doing? How do you feel about the act of doing? It's the biggest cliche, and it feels so corny to say, and I nearly want to vomit in my mouth. But you hear people say, it's about the journey, not the destination. The reason is a cliche, and the reason it's so overused is because it's so true. There's so much merit to that. Let's remove the idea of the journey, but say like just the showing up every day and doing the thing that is aligned with your dream, I think is such a blessing. It's such a blessing. There's a few other things I wanted to talk about on this that I think really feed into this. One of them is that I never used to be, and I've said this a bunch of times on the podcast, and I hope this makes sense when I say it, and I'm not sure whether anyone will relate with this. But I never considered myself a very spiritual person. And friends have challenged me on that and said I'm probably far more spiritual and have been far more spiritual than I realise. But the older I'm getting and the more I'm experiencing life, I'm certainly developing an understanding with how spiritual I can be and how spiritual I am. And a big part of that relationship at the moment is having faith in what life is doing for me. I don't know if you've ever heard this expression that life is happening for us, not to us. It's certainly the foundation of my spiritual beliefs at the moment, that we're consistently being tested. Our character is consistently under test to see if we deserve the opportunities that life is presenting us. Just recently, I've had some incredible professional opportunities that are so aligned with my dreams and what I want to do for a career long term. And they're certainly not opportunities that are guaranteed, but they're little hints of where I want to be, and these opportunities that I'm moving towards and I feel are within my reach. And I'm so excited about them. It puts a smile on my face when I think about how cool it would be to actualize those next steps in my progression. But at the same point in time, whilst life has handed me opportunity on one platter, on the other platter, it's handed me some challenges. And when those challenges have been presented and I've recognized them and seen them as what some would define as a professional step backwards, or a real challenge to face, or maybe something to be frustrated or pissed off about, just this, and I'm so proud of this because I think it's such a testament to the character that I'm trying to show up with at the moment. I'm not trying to big up myself. I know that everyone would be able to relate to this, and I think it's important to be able to recognize your strengths. The strength that I'm experiencing right now that I haven't always been able to say is that when that challenge has popped up, I've recognized the want to be then pessimistic or pissed off about it and gone, hold on. On one hand, there's these incredible opportunities ahead of me. And yes, this is a challenge, but life right now is testing my character. In Greek mythology, they say character is fate. I'm a big believer of that. Your character is not who you are when things are good. Your character isn't how you smile when the sun's shining or when life is moving in your favor. Your character is who you are when shit isn't going to plan. Like when you're running and it starts pissing down rain and there's a thunderstorm and you're soaking wet, how bright is your smile then? And I think life is always testing you in this regard. And so when I've seen these challenges pop up lately and these little blows that kind of jab away at you and just beat you up and bruise you a little, I'm like, okay, smile because life is testing me right now. And the way I show up is actually what my character is. My character is how I respond during these challenging times, that I can look myself in the mirror and go, hey, I'm proud of the man that's staring back at me. And I believe that's when life says, hey, the opportunities that we're presenting you, you're ready for them. You think about dreams, and when we talk about dreams, we often think big picture, which I don't think is a bad thing at all. But you would say that some of the big dreams that we see a lot of in media and TV and social media is people like the musicians that we listen to or the actors that we watch, and they're these people who we often deem to be living out their dreams. And whilst it's not always true, to a lot of regard, I'd say it probably is. And we think about these people who have taken huge steps in their progression. Probably the clearest example of this is someone like a Justin Bieber, who is probably going to have an experience, or probably has had an experience that's true to what a lot of younger people will experience through social media and things like TikTok now, where this guy starts as a young man, I think like 14 or 13, putting up these covers on YouTube, and all of a sudden he's discovered and blows up, and he almost leapfrogs all of these stages and steps that are part of the professional progression of an artist to this kid who's performing world tours on big stages in front of tens of thousands of fans, and the media's all over him like a leech, and there's all these negative stories and character attacks and just challenges that I think would be so overwhelming for a young person who hasn't truly developed their character and doesn't have a deep sense of identity and understanding yet, and who, like his family and the people around him, that I don't know his story so well, but I can imagine they're all experiencing this at the same time and they're not totally prepared for it. It's all the kind of steps in the middle that, as my mate Taku says, with every level there's a new devil. And I think like that new devil, the analogy is just a new challenge. So it's as you usually take steps up the ladder of progression, you meet slightly harder and less forgiving challenges that you have to overcome. And every time you overcome one of those, you're a little more resilient. You're more anti-fragile. This idea, anti-fragility, was shared to me by a guy named Tom Nash, who was a guest of the show, incredible speaker and great mind. And he said, resilience, like a rock's resilient, you can put it under all of this pressure and it remains the same. But he said, I strive to be anti-fragile. Anti-fragility is best coined or described by the idea of the muscular system in us human beings, where we can lift a weight and put a muscle under tension and the fibers break down and they repair and they grow back stronger so that the weight is lighter to lift and we can lift even more weight the next time. And it's this idea that as we step up the levels of progression, the weights get heavier, but you get stronger. And so you're consistently putting yourself under maybe similar feeling of tension, but they're bigger challenges and you're better equipped to handle them. But when you take these huge leapfrogs in life, like to use the gym analogy, you go from the 60 kilo bench press, one plate on each side, to 2 plates. That's a 40 kilo difference. If you're not incredibly strong, you're going to notice that difference so much so that you'll fold under pressure. And I think you see that in a lot of these pop stars who have a huge rise up the ranks and who leapfrog those steps of what would be the regular trajectory of start releasing some covers, then go and play a pub gig in front of 50 people who are drinking schooners and a little bit too pissed and maybe hurl a little bit of abuse at you, but a few people enjoy. And then all of a sudden you're playing the small show and then you're the opening act on a bigger stage and then you're a closing act at a festival, and then all of a sudden you're on the world tour where you're selling out stadiums. There's so many, and I'm no expert on the musical space, but I'm just using that as an example of progressing up the ranks. It's similar with me. I've had the blessing, and maybe this is a convenient perspective because I haven't become a big deal in the podcast space. I'm able to experience a little bit more noise, listenership, audience around the podcast than I could 2 years ago, to see what that feels like. I've had a few clips that have gone viral on social media. One that had like 25 million views, and probably 90% of the comments are really, 99% are really positive. But you just get 1%, which on 25 million views is a fair few, who just don't want a bar of you. You're not their cup of tea. They think you're a prick. They don't like you. They think that you're soft because you're emotional or whatever it may be. And it's these little tests that you handle well and you go, okay. Then what happens when I go through maybe that first time that the podcast really, like a whole episode, hits a big group of people and they don't necessarily like me? We see this with people all the time in the podcast space. Their show grows and then they start monetizing it and the people are pissed off that they got ads. Like there's always something for people to be pissed off about. And that certainly doesn't represent the whole of your audience. It's a very small portion. But as you step up the levels, you're allowed to, you're given the grace to prepare yourself for those bigger challenges that lay ahead. And so I think that if you can survive the test of character when things aren't going to plan and when there is some negative feedback, then you get the gift of being able to grow from what you're going through, but also to enjoy the experience of the doing. And you learn to walk the tightrope and the line between ambition and appreciation, between striving for more, but being grateful for where you're at. And I think that's one of the hardest skills in life in general, is to use that idea, or that coin that term of multifocal vision, to be able to look at where you're at and be super in the present and recognize it for the blessing that it is, but also to have the ambition to strive for more and to grow and develop yourself. It's really hard to do the two in unison. I think often for me at least, I go through periods of immense gratitude and peace and contentment for where I'm at. And then kind of like I go through a chapter of striving, not really satisfied. It's very hard to do both at the same time. I don't even know if it's possible. Maybe some of you listening can speak to a better skill. I can certainly have gratitude and appreciation and absolute contentment for relationship, health, those kind of things. But there's always a part of you, I think, is trying to develop on and build, and maybe I do it better in those areas than I do professionally. So yeah, I don't know how people resonate with that or relate, but I think it's one of the great challenges of life, is being able to be happy with where you're at, but also strive for more. And so yeah, I feel like this topic today has just been front of mind as I navigate through things professionally, and I am just super pleased with where the podcast is at. Like 4.5 years of doing this, and I'm, as I said before, like Tim Noonan said to me, you don't always get what you want, but you get what you need. And I feel really excited about where I'm at in life, and I'm trying to learn from this experience right now, to soak it in, but to continue to invest in myself, which, as someone who, I have so much self-belief in taking opportunities that are presented to me, but I don't always invest in myself because sometimes I feel bad for being selfish. So yeah, it's such a funny space. I guess all of this to say, I don't know whether you resonate with what I'm talking about today, but I don't think that you should give up on your dreams. If you have something that you want to achieve, it's never too late. Certainly, I think the grace that we're afforded in childhood becomes a little bit harder to realise and feel the support when you get into adulthood. I think that we get to 18 at school. I left school at 16 and went and studied at TAFE for a year in fitness and got my Cert 3 and 4 to be a PT. I've kind of had when you think about it, God, I've had such a bro transition of life. Like I left school to be a PT, I went to real estate. Now I'm a podcast, bro. It's actually a little bit corny when you say it like that, but it all feels true to me. But for most people, you leave school at 18. I think especially most people today, and you're like encouraged to go to university. And if you don't go to university, you've got to get a trade or go to TAFE, or you get like a 1 year gap year. But if you pick something different to that, it's like the world tells you you're a loser. You haven't figured it out yet. And I had this kid message me the other day. Well, this young man, he's getting towards the end of his schooling time, and he said to me, I don't know what I want to do. I think he listens to the podcast, or I've spoken at the school that he attends. He said, I don't know what I want to do with my life yet. Like, what do you think I should do? And I'm like, oh, that's a question I can't answer, man, because I'm figuring that out day by day myself. I was like, but I think you should afford yourself the grace to try things, to not feel like at 18 you got to have it figured out. One of my mates says, we have to go through a test to get our pen license at 12, and then 6 years later they go, hey, you've got to know exactly what you want to do with the rest of your life, and you can't abandon that track. Or, man, what are you doing with yourself? Like, there's so much grace that's taken from us, and I'm all for ownership, accountability for, for the guys out there, for being a man and like taking responsibility for where you're at. Like, I certainly think that you have to be aware of what you're doing and tracking, and don't throw your life away. But I don't think you have to have it all figured out yet. I don't know that we ever do. And I just see and have conversations with people all the time who I just get this sense that they feel trapped in their lives. And I think that's such a tragic thing to hear, that you feel trapped. And I don't mean that in any way of attacking people who might feel that, but I just think you deserve to give yourself the grace and the freedom to experience life. And I know that everyone's situation is different, and maybe you're sitting there right now feeling a little bit trapped, and you're saying, well, it's easy for you to say, Brad, because you don't have kids and you don't have a mortgage. But I certainly have responsibilities, and I'm setting my life up and designing my life in a way alongside Soph to make sure that we can live a life that's true to us. And that takes so much courage. Like, if you're doing that, like, hats off to you, because it takes a lot of courage to live a life that's true to you, to live a life by design. And it's taken so much courage and incredible vulnerability to step into the unknown of any new endeavor or any pursuit of a dream in my life. But I just think, what's the alternative? To live a life of regret, to live a life of disappointment, to have always wondered like what was out there for you had you have tried. I know I've shared this story on the podcast before, but there's these two incredible perspectives that I think about consistently. As a kid in hospital, I met a young man by the name of Krishnan. He was 9 years of age, and he had leukemia, and he was in a quite progressed, advanced stage of his illness. And at this point, he'd been through intense chemo and radiotherapy. He'd lost all of his hair and his eyebrows, and we were roommates throughout a 2-week period in hospital where my parents became like his parents, and he became like my brother because his family just wasn't around for him. Like 9 years of age, we were the same age at the time. And I watched this kid show up every day with a smile on his face, with so much grace and enthusiasm for life. And I remember like observing it as a young man, and I was in hospital just for what they call a tune-up in the CF space, which is basically like a yearly car service. We just go in and make sure everything's okay and, get some treatments. And so I was certainly okay and in a good place with my health, but I watched this guy and observed him as a mate, and just thought he was the most incredible kid for the way that he handled his challenges. And I left the hospital and said goodbye to my friend, and I would go back to the hospital every 8 weeks to get a checkup in Sydney at the Children's Hospital in Randwick there. And every time I'd go back, I remember I'd go with my parents up to the desk to ask if he was still in hospital, and we never knew his surname, and they didn't have a record of him. I just remember always thinking, I wonder if he survived. I wonder if he's still here with us. I wonder if he did pass. And I hope in some miracle he's still here. And God, I'd love to, if he was still here, I'd love to track this guy down one day and meet him and chat. But I just think about that perspective of, that guy who at such a young age was going through one of the hardest things, like children's cancer, If he had the opportunity to live life today, how would he live? And on the other hand, I met a gentleman by the name of Ernie when I was in hospital at the age of 23. He was in his 60s, I believe, and Ernie had terminal cancer as well. We created this incredible friendship over the course of the 2 weeks that I was in hospital, and I was a little bit sick at the time. And Ernie would come around to my room every day for a cup of tea and some biscuits, and we'd sit and have a chat about life. And throughout the course of our friendship, we spoke about work and family, and he had, children, grandchildren that he loved dearly, and had a life that he treasured, and some great experiences. And I remember it having a visceral experience for me of, I'm 23, and I felt at the time so lost for passion and purpose, and just stuck in my life. And it was the perspective shift I needed to go and pursue a life that was meaningful and fulfilling to me. And I remember standing at Ernie's funeral with my mum. My mum knew him too. And sad for his people, sad to have lost a guy who had an impact on me, but privileged because I felt like he gave me a gift, an incredible perspective, and that if we have the opportunity to live this life, and in the knowledge of the fact that we're mortal and we won't be here forever, and one day we'll see our death, how do you want to live your life? And I don't think it's enough for me to just exist. I don't think it's enough for any of us. I truly believe that if you can approach existence with enthusiasm, you're afforded the gift of life. And that's what this conversation is all about. Don't squander your dreams. They certainly don't have to pay your bills. They don't have to jet set you around the world. They don't have to buy you a house. Incredible if they do. I'd love for mine to do that someday. But just because they aren't your career, and just because they don't measure up to some metric of what someone on social media has told you they have to, doesn't mean that you're not living a life that's true to your dreams. I hope this resonated. Thanks for listening and watching. Catch you at the next one.